Welcome to MCL Talks. My name is Dominic Quejada, this Manila Composers Lab. We are very pleased to welcome Mack today, my old friend and my former teacher. You do consider me a friend, don't you, Dita?
Sure.
Yes.
That's fine.
I was hoping that he would agree. We will be presenting two of his pieces today, but before we proceed, I'd like to introduce you to Mack.
Not interesting to introduce me.
Well, interesting enough for us to invite you.
I think it's interesting in this regard that maybe it's not so common that a contemporary composer also writes for jazz big bands. There are some who do, but mostly people don't do it. And I must say, if you recall my real background is experimental rock music and jazz. That's where I'm coming from. And automatically, if you go further in this direction, like many of these people did, especially in Germany in the late 60s, early 70s, they came very close also to electronic music in the contemporary music field. So there was always this kind of gray zone where both genres were meeting and blending into each other. And you may also recall that in the Donaueschingen Music Festival, there was always, still is, one evening with contemporary jazz. And which in my time in the 70s and early 80s, it was always on Sunday evening. Now it's always on Saturday evening. And so that's what it's in a way, the story that step by step I came into this world. And when I was already studying composition in Freiburg, I was the pianist of the big band there. And I did more play instead of compose for the big band. And I did always a lot of improvisation. You may know this percussionist, Michael Ranta, who is living in Cologne and had this big Asian sound percussion shop. And since 20, no, more, within 30 years, I make regularly improvisation concerts with him, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, such stuff. So I'm still working in this completely different field of musical practice. And then I came back to the big band in the late, I think it was in 2009 or 2010, I'm not sure about, when the Goethe Institute asked me whether I would be interested to coach a big band in Indonesia, in Bandung. They were supposed to get an arranger, Chris Walden, this German who lives in America. And then all of a sudden he canceled, and then they asked me because they knew that I have slightly a connection with jazz. And the leader of that big band in Indonesia, he has studied in Germany, he knew me as well. So he said, okay, fine, why not? And then I started just to write some big band pieces for that big band in Indonesia, in Bandung. And it was so much fun for me to do that again, that it really, since 2010, it became a regular activity. Coaching big bands. I coached this Indonesian one for, I think, 4 years, came back every year. And then I presented my pieces to our big band leader here in the university. And he said, hey, why not we make a project out of it? And so on and so on. Hello, Marie-Luise. And so this went on and on. I don't play anymore because my fingers are too slow. So it's better that I write today and the others play it. And we have made 2 CDs with our university big band. We have no jazz department. That's like, for example, in Graz, there's a real jazz department. We don't have that. The players are mainly students of music education or some from the music, from the instrumental department. And the first CD was still a little moderate in the degree of difficulty. The second one was really difficult, to be honest. And so what you have perhaps heard at YouTube, this was a live recording of that second phase. But for the CD, then when we made the CD, I must say I wasn't satisfied with some of the solo contributions of the soloists, because there was only two real people who could play solos, with the guitar player and the alto saxophonist, but no one in the brass could play a solo. So then we decided to engage a trumpet player, which is the first trumpet player of the NDR big band. And he came and he made in two pieces the solos on trumpet. Also in Notek, the one you have selected, I'll talk about. So this maybe a little about my biography as well. And the piece itself is nothing special. Notek comes from the Balinese word kotekan, means this kind of interlocking playing. And it just refers to a basic riff in piano and bass, which I have done in a way that it's kind of interlocking playing. And it also gives the character that it's always changing, but it's in fact only a 2-bar ostinato which they play. And that's the main issue why it's called Notek. So, any other questions before to that?
I think this would be a good time for us to listen to the music. And...
Good. Okay, Feliz, please.
fantastic.
This is our nice cover with our Lübeck door.
Yeah. I think you gave me one. I think you gave me one of those, and it's in my office right now. Because
yeah,
I've been using it for my.
That's the old one.
Yeah, the old, that one. I've been using it for my classes in harmony, dance harmony.
So, please ask me what you want about it.
Dominic, do you like to have a discussion of this and then the discussion of the second piece, or do you like to conflate the two?
No.
Do we proceed?
I think we should proceed here and then transition. We'll see how we transition to the second piece.
The next
I have
one.
something planned if it doesn't go there.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay. So we have discussions now about this particular piece. It's a fantastic piece.
And this part of Dieter's life, I think, is interesting.
Yeah, the thing about Dieter, I'm older than all of you. Dieter is almost my age, almost. I mean,
You're older
maybe
than
about. No, Dieter is older than me for maybe about 7 or 8 years. He's like my big brother. Anyway, I met him in. Well, you don't know this, but he will remember this. I think I met him when I was working in ALM, and they called me up in the morning. You come to the office, and because I work part-time. You come to the office in the afternoon because there's this German composer who's here, and he just came from Bali. I think it was your second trip to Bali at that time, Dieter, in 1988. So I came over, and then when I came to the office, he's in the end of the room, the last door of the room, of the corridor. So I was walking towards it. I was excited. I wanted to meet this guy, a German composer who just came from Bali. That was so exciting. Then before I entered the room, I hear him playing something that sounded like Bill Evans. I think it was All the Things You Are. It's one of those ballads. And I was thinking, is this the guy I was supposed to meet? But it was fantastic. And then we talked about everything, Bali, about exchange, about everything. I got to know about the DAAD, about everything that I was to do in the future.
What year was this again?
1988. Feliz was just born. Feliz was just born because it was about April. So Feliz was just born in 1988. Juro Kim was going to be born in October of that year. So I think and he was very young. He was a very handsome guy, curly hair, jazzer guy who just came from Bali. I mean, and I realized something. This is which I have the terminology later. It's called the Protean self. He played jazz in a very good way. I found out he plays Balinese gamelan very well. I like a Balinese. He's already spoke Bahasa at the time, and I heard this fantastic composition, Angin, I think, which I said was not jazz. It was different, and I got the score of Kammer Musik 2, which I heard in Freiburg. And you know the story, how it invoked memories to me. So that's Dieter for me. I think this is a very unique personality, this Protean self of Dieter, which apparently we should all learn to be. This morning I was listening to Juro Kim's very beautiful pop songs, which I said, wow, this is the craftsmanship doesn't change, but it's the language. Were you always like that, Dieter, from the beginning? I mean, you went to Bali, you were doing Musik, you studied with Fernio.
For me, this was never a contradiction to work in these different fields. It was just, for me, kind of enrichment. And I think the relationship between gamelan playing and big band music is quite obvious. Yeah? It's this kind of collectiveness in playing, something which is quite similar. And it's also the intensity, the physicality of the music when you play it. This is quite similar in both. The only difference is that in big band music, in Balinese music, there is no improvisation at all, as we know. While in big band music, there are also big band pieces which are completely through composed. Villanueva did a lot of through composed pieces, for example, or Jill Evans. But especially in this piece, you have heard that I always put in short sections improvisation here on the guitar, then on the baritone saxophone, on the soprano, and they are always changing beside the long trumpet solo. Yeah, okay.
What I noticed, and this will be my last question because I know others will have questions too. But what I noticed is that there's this notion of groove, of feel. Because if you look at the notation, it's very straight, but you have the feeling of groove. I couldn't explain it, which I would see also in Balinese music, this kind of groove.
That's always the problem.
There's groove.
Jonas, I go so far and I say any kind of music that is notated and then performed must have a kind of groove, must have a kind of musicality. That is the same in a Mozart sonata for me.
Yes,
yeah?
okay.
If you play a Mozart sonata like a mechanic, like a computer, then it's no music. Yeah, you
right,
have to
precisely.
bring life, you have to bring physicality into the music, into the performance.
It's good.
For me, this is always an important thing. Yeah.
You have to understand it and you have to interpret it. You can't just play it.
Yes.
You have to understand it and you have to interpret it. You can't just play it.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Never think, just one addition. Never think in any kind of music of the world that the notation is the music. The notation is just an information how to do something, but then you have to go look behind the notation.
Mm-hmm. With your experience with working with a big band, contrasting with, I don't know how to call your other works, more serious works, but this was also pretty substantial. Would you thinking about this idea of interpretation when performing, since the idiom is something that's familiar to the performer, as opposed to when you make something that's completely new, is the interpretation part easier, or is it about the same?
You mean in this big band music?
Yes, yes.
It depends on the people. Also in this case, we practiced almost a whole semester, and we worked together, and they made suggestions, and I made suggestions back, and just to get into the music. I also remember when I was in Fullerton in California, I gave a class there on my big band compositions. It was a jazz department, and they looked, and they were very traditional, and they said, "What do you do? It's very strange what you are doing. We don't understand that. It's not the real jazz." Yeah, and then the day later we started to practice two pieces of mine with a big band. And then after the practicing, one of the saxophone players came to me and said, "We have done it the wrong way around. We should have started to play first. Then we would have understood it better."
Well, I do have a question though, because I'm never really familiar with the big band scene and how it's being performed. Yeah. But you were talking about the collaborative process. I was wondering actually if it comes to a point when you can also compose a big band music while having many elements very open as well. So it's like going the opposite instead of just like thoroughly composing it. Like, does it also come to a point where everything's just like all carte blanche?
Yeah, that's right. If you look at the big band music that has been composed, you have really everything from 100% written until kind of graphic notation, like the London Jazz Composers Orchestra, Barry Guy, or maybe the jazz opera by play Escalator Over the Hill from the New York Jazz Composers Orchestra with Michael Mentler. They did a lot of graphic scores similar to the early scores of Penderecki, for example. There are a lot of similarities in this type of graphics, space notation, and so on. This was very typical for the, let's say, for the new jazz music scene in New York and also in Europe in the 60s, late 60s and in the 70s.
Anthony Braxton, I think, was there.
Exactly, Anthony Braxton in the US.
Cecil Taylor,
Alexander von Schlippenbach, for example.
Yes.
And the Dutch scene with Misha Mengelberg piano and Han Benning percussion. And they were always working with precise and then very open notation, and it was always switching from one extreme to the other and any kind of in-between models. Yeah? So there's really not this model how it should be. You have really both, from both sides, you can from 100% notation to graphic notation. I even know forms where they improvise completely free, like in the Sun Ra Orchestra, for example.
Yeah.
And then just composed in the big band on the spot. It doesn't work always to my feeling, but when it worked, it can be very exciting as well.
Questions from anyone, or should I proceed?
Well, I still have one more question, I think. Also, just because Dieter, you were also saying that you were also like seeing no contradictions whatsoever with these different musical languages that you've...
Can you speak loud? I don't understand you.
Okay, I'll do it one more time.
That's good.
Yeah, okay. So you were talking about navigating through different musical languages, right? Like from big band to composing art music, whatever. And you somehow said that there seems to be no contradiction between these languages.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just wonder if there was a time when you were thinking about, for example, like band music, big band music. And was there a time when sometimes these knowledges of languages kind of hinder you from actually cultivating some ideas because they're opposing each other or something? Is there any opportunity?
No, never. Okay. It's just in the moment I sit down and I start to work on something, then I really want to do it. Even if I want to do it, something which I call functional music, for example, someone is for the marriage, they want a small song. Okay, then I compose a small song, fine. And I do that with my craftsmanship. And I stick to that as well. That's part of my job in a way.
No, the fantastic thing is how you are able to compartmentalize in your mind all these, or map out in your mind all these different kinds of languages, so that you're really genuinely writing jazz or big band music or maybe this wedding song. I like to hear that one time, and and chamber music for the new music practice. It's one thing to be able to do all those things, but it's another thing to be able to compartmentalize in your mind. But most of the people here are like that. AJ is like that too, for instance, or Juro Kim. I heard his songs this morning, and I sort of enjoyed it. I mean, it all has to do with the background. My background in high school was Jethro Tull and and Chick Corea Return to Forever. So it was like that thing. I mean, we're really evolving actually as people.
Yeah, there was only a time when I was starting to study in Freiburg where I didn't mention my background, because Freiburg was so second Vienna school orientated.
Oh yes.
Everything with jazz and rock was just, that was in the Adorno meaning, that was just
it's Adorno's new music.
What was the term about jazz? I don't remember it now. At least a negative term. Gebrauchsmusik.
Gebrauchsmusik. Yeah.
I don't know how you translate that into English.
Functional music, but that's not an exact.
Dieter, do you find though that you have to compartmentalize at all? I mean, you mentioned earlier that there's no difference between these other composing and between these other genres, and then Jonas expressed admiration for your ability to compartmentalize. But do you have to compartmentalize at all, to your mind?
That's a difficult question, Nick. I think in a way you have to, because the prerequisites of composing in that way and in that way are different. Yeah, I think differently if I compose for a big band compared when I compose, like for example, the next piece then for the gamelan. These are two different two different worlds of perception, two different worlds of thinking for me. But they influence each other. There is kind of cross-cultural meeting in myself then.
Well,
yeah,
oh, sorry.
yeah. Juro, go ahead.
Yeah, because Jonas was mentioning anyway that I compose pop music, and I recently actually just released a single. I actually find it difficult to transcend that, probably just because I was for a time I was composing pop music, and it seems like my mind is suddenly like fixated on towards just thinking about the language, or like the pop musical language, and somehow I cannot are having difficulty transcending back to the other thing that I'm supposed to do. So I don't know how you can actually like try to explain more of that.
Maybe like that, I could never work on both, let's say on a contemporary orchestra piece and a jazz big band piece at the same time. That's impossible. Yeah. So it's when I work on the big band piece, okay, then I'm in the big band mode. And if I compose something which I see as my real contemporary music that I will do, what I like to do, then I'm really in that world. I even would say that's one of my main processes of composition, that I need quite a time to get into the mood of the piece I want to compose. That's why I have a lot of preparational time for it, while the final writing process is extremely fast. But the preparational process is just to get into the mood of the piece. And from all the sketches I have, maybe 20 pages of sketches, maybe then finally I just use one, yeah? Or just don't use it at all. But I have somewhat dive into the idea, and that holds for anything what I'm doing as an artist. Yeah.
Is having to maintain a separation between them. Is it specific to composing, or is it specific to big band? Because I remember back when I was studying in Lübeck, I think at certain points you would be composing at the time, but we would still be playing gamelan every week. Did that not get in the way, so to speak, of whatever?
No, that's again something different. That's practice. That's my practical experience. Playing gamelan is playing gamelan, like playing a Mozart on the piano. And that could happen during a time where I'm compose a piece. That doesn't interfere.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's just like, you know all these languages, but you're just like speaking them one at a time, and you're not conflating all of them.
Can I throw a question to AJ, because he does something like that too?
Yeah, actually, my mind is running.
Do you compartmentalize? I mean, your pop songs are very pop songs, the one you use for the church, and then your neue music is really neue music. I mean, how do you compartmentalize?
I don't know. I was battling with that word some years ago. That I was thinking that I needed to really differentiate between writing, songs for church and concert music, which we perform. But when I embraced those two things, I think I found my own identity as a composer, because I'm the only one. Maybe I'm the only one who's doing that thing, and I think it's very helpful embracing those two things, however contradicting they may be, because as Dieter has said, one really influences the other. And since one influences the other, it somehow, me as a contemporary composer affects much of how my aesthetics as a songwriter for church songs, and sometimes me as a songwriter for church songs, sometimes it affects what I do as a contemporary composer. So I think it's embracing it is like introducing this new thing to myself that I am this. I think it's something to have to do with identity. So.
Well, that is very strong also in Dieter's example here, because you see his techniques as, you know, that he's not just this ordinary jazz arranger you find in Berkeley. I mean, you know that he's kind of a different, I mean, the techniques in the orchestration, I mean, it's not what you find in the ordinary sense. I mean, not even Chick Corea can arrange in that sense. I mean, those people couldn't arrange in that sense, in the real sense of a big band. And then the big band composers, they already have a language, but this is kind of unique. I mean, it's like the Steely Dan of blues in that sense. I mean, and that is because he's a contemporary composer. I mean, it's because of that.
Marie-Luise, please.
I think it's not about compartmentalizing at all, but using the language, you know, the vocabulary, you know, in contexts, in different contexts.
Yeah, you can say that like that. That's okay. And I just want to add one thing, and then maybe we should stop with this and go to the next piece. I face this problem. Yeah, okay, Feliz still. I face that problem in other connections. For example, I'm quite often asked by young people to compose them a piece for a Jugendmusiziert competition, or a church choir from my village where I'm living asks me to make an arrangement for them. And in this case, I always have to adapt to the circumstances. I can't write for the church choir like I write for the Schola Cantorum Stuttgart. Yeah. So, but the other thing is, if I write something for them which is a little out of the normal what they know, but they still can perform it, then they start to become interested in what I'm doing beside that, and then they come to other performances and listen to my real music in a way. And I think this is a very nice back and forth process, and I like that. Feliz, you had still something?
Yes, I wanted to ask about if you could say something more about the preparation, because I think a while ago you mentioned that you are improvising. So you improvise a lot, and is this like part of preparation when you're composing?
Not for the jazz pieces. The big band pieces, ironically, the big band pieces, I write straightforward the score without any improvising before. And it may only happen that in the rehearsals I sometimes join with improvising a little. But as I said, my fingers are not so good anymore. But for my other compositions, because I always work very much with harmonic tableaus, that means that I often experiment with harmonic constellations. And that is also kind of improvisation, which I do. But as I said before, what I then use in the composition itself is something else. But the improvisation helps me a little to get into a mood of something I'm interested in. So maybe like that, yeah.
Couple of comments about the music. I really liked your transitions in page 6 and page 9. I liked how they were sudden, but the materials were crafted such that they complemented the material preceding enough, that they weren't jarring, but they were contrasting enough that you noticed the sudden transition.
This is certainly an experience which comes from my contemporary composing. As you know, that's the way I'm working. Yeah?
Yes.
That's my Mozart influence.
And that leads very nicely to my next question. I don't know how much of it was my knowing that you wrote this and knowing your other works as well, but it seemed to me that the idiom was very present. Can you hear me? Should I speak louder?
If you speak louder, it's better.
Okay, sorry. It seemed to me that the idiom was very present in the music, in the way that the music is structured and in the individual gestures, that the big band idiom was very present. And I found myself asking, where is Dieter here? Who are you musically and how are you present in this music? Or is that not important? Is the piece important?
This is important. And I think if you would listen to all of my big band pieces, you would hear the red line, a special style of melodic lines, a special style of exactly this contrasting of sections that finally refers very much to my contemporary compositions. It's just I use another language. Yeah. I feel very, very close to that. That's me, at least a part of me.
I think, are there any more questions? If there aren't any more, then we can proceed, unless Dito wants to say something.
I would just want to add to, finally that I wouldn't compose and I wouldn't bring that to public on a CD if I would not feel that it's a part of me. AJ.
Yeah, one more interesting thing. You mentioned the kotekan and interlocking playing, which was very present indeed in Ngotek. How the different parts interlocked and transferred between each other. And this is also a very prevalent gesture in jazz in general, where even if people are improvising, where it would be your turn and then this person's turn, and then we would close and go into a tutti section.
Trading force.
We go to the next?
Yeah. I was going to work towards a transition, but we can do it in editing.
You can call me later then.
You taught him too much, Dieter. Now he thinks this is a composition. Okay.
Well, Jonas made the mistake of telling me to moderate. Feliz, next piece, please.
So do you want to first, should I play first the video, or you want to talk about the score?
I have to say a little about it before. The next piece is, because it's a little special. You know, it's for gamelan instruments, for Pelox Lendro, and it's the third composition that I wrote for gamelan instruments. Although after the second one, I decided not to compose anymore for gamelan instruments. But then last year, when this festival in Essen asked me to do it, and I also was in a very unique mood, like I have to start everything in my life again from the beginning, I found, okay, gamelan has accompanied my life for 40 years, and that means I can also start again with the gamelan, like being at the beginning of everything. Yeah. And that's also a little referring to the title, The Time After Reset, yeah? Which now is very popular because of the Corona crisis as well, but that I didn't know that at that time. So the problem is now what you hear, what you see in the video was the last rehearsal, which we did in February in Bandung. The premiere should be on the 1st of November in Essen, but it was canceled because of Corona. But it was postponed to 2022. They will then in 2 years they will do it in Essen. It's for gamelan orchestra, fixed media, and solo percussion, not as a soloist in a solo concert form, just single percussion player that also joins. It's Max Riefer who is playing. You know him very well, and the problem is that it's not the original gamelan the piece is written for. So there are some sounds which are not exactly like I want, but it's still fine for me. And the second thing is that the instruments of Max, they are a real disaster because we couldn't bring all these instruments that I need to the rehearsals. He certainly will have them here then when we play it in Essen. So, but it's still in a kind of quality which I can accept. So, but you have to know that in advance, that then the tam-tam will be a big, much better sounding tam-tam, and so on and so on. Okay, not much more which I want to say before. Then I would suggest we have thought how we arrange, if Feliz and me, how we shall arrange it with the score. And so we have decided to look at the video because it's also interesting how they play. And in special moments, some pages will be shown on a split screen. And thanks a lot, Feliz, for that hard work that you have done. And I think it's great work. Thank you very much. So please start with it.
Okay.
Around page 11, while they were speaking, there was a resonance going on, and I couldn't tell what it was. Was that both gongs? And then again around page 9, page 18.
11, you say?
Yes, 10 or 11 thereabouts.
This is one of the tapes in the background.
Oh, okay.
I do have a list of questions. I'll just start with some of the like focusing on the music itself first. So you mentioned. Okay, are you ready though? Okay, all right. Yeah, so you mentioned that the instrumentation involves the gamelan, and then you also have electronic media and also percussion. I want to pick your brain on this though, because I also engaged in the Javanese gamelan at some point in my composition studies, and I composed this piece where I want to erase all these hierarchies, or not pretty much erase, but put it in the background, as to the point of not saying that there are soloists, because in Javanese gamelan, like you have the sinden, you have all the elaborating instruments and all that. Yes, the ribab and the gambang, and it's like they can be deemed as soloists, but they're also not at the same time, especially pretty much opposed with the Western musical concept of soloist. I don't know how to navigate this. I encountered this question from one of my professors, that I should actually put in these instruments in the instrumentation. So this should be composed for a large ensemble and soloists. And I noticed that you did the same thing with by mentioning that there is percussion. And I kind of wonder, because I do not want to reproduce the hierarchies in having as how Western music actually have kind of put soloists in the foreground, as opposed to Javanese gamelan or something like that. So how can you actually navigate through that?
First, the gamelan instruments are also percussion instruments, by the way. The thing is that I intended and the percussion player, he's playing alone. That doesn't mean that he is a soloist who is accompanied by the gamelan. I think the whole texture through the piece was clear about that. He's just part, like he's a player of the whole group, playing instruments that are not in the gamelan and which I would like to use because of their sound qualities. So it was a pure decision of sounds I was interested in that I selected these instruments. Actually, in the beginning, I wanted to involve 4 percussionists with more instruments, but then the organizer asked me to reduce it to 1 out of financial reasons. And I said, okay, no problem. And yeah, then it came out like that. So for me, it was not a problem of hierarchy at all. Even opposite, I tried to avoid the Javanese hierarchy from like a pyramid where you have the low sounds and then it gets faster the higher you get. And that was what I tried to avoid. I was more interested in the dichotomy between textural and structural. That means textural on various levels. This is actually a piece you should listen in a hall, because then you have a much better spatial perception of what is really going on. That's really a problem with just with the loudspeaker. I know that. But anyway, I think you can imagine how it works. And so these structural things are rhythmic models, harmonic settings, which I prepared before, which then are presented against these different kinds of different types of wallpapers in the background that go through the piece. And this idea of different types of wallpapers came that I were thinking, how can I deal with these instruments? How can I deal with these scales without falling into a kind of ethnic trap? And so I think the most interesting thing in combining these pelog and slanter tunings are the beats that happen between various pitches. And that's what I tried then to be the main idea beside the textural structural thing, that I use the beats between different pitches as a special sound quality that is the motto. How would you translate motto in English?
Motif?
It's not a theme.
Yeah, motif.
No, motif is also not motif. Okay.
Motto in the sense.
Something like that. Something like that.
Thematic. There's no translation actually.
Something that is always present, but it's not the main theme you are working with. Something like that. Yeah, though that would be my answer.
Yes, but aren't you worried then by merely describing the instrumentation then, gamelan, fixed media, and percussion? Would that actually like invoke already a sense of hierarchy in that we're seeing now suddenly the soloist or the percussionist as the soloist? Or especially in the minds of people actually, live through these spaces in Western classical music?
I think this is just a problem of naming the piece, and not a problem. In the moment you listen to the piece and you look at the score, it's clear that it's not a soloist who is accompanied. It's just because he's alone. I have written solo percussion because it's just one player.
So it's really just semantics then, right?
Yes.
I see.
How long is this piece, Dita? Is it the entire? We have the entire piece. We listen to the entire piece, right? It's
yes. 20,
and
20 or 22
yeah,
minutes.
around in that area, yeah, right. And all of those players read notes. I mean, all of those. Is this the Kiai Fatahila?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I saw Iwan playing. Was he playing the drums or?
Ivan was playing the electronic sounds and the drums and the drums.
The drums. Yeah, fantastic. In a way, this speaks so much about the way by which the music was imagined and constructed, because you have the performers who can read music, who are gamelan players, and you have Max, of course, whom you've worked with for ages, and then you have, of course, the fixed media. Apparently, that was kind of the defining parameter, in fact, in even composing this piece, that you have the performers who can do this. And would it have been, how different would it be? I know it's going to be different. How different would it be, for example, if you have another gamelan group? Is it possible to do this with another gamelan group?
That's a good question. I think I would have not accepted this commission if I would have to work with another group, because I was, from the very beginning, it was clear for me the only group who can do that is Kiai Fatahila and Max, and maybe there are 2 other percussionists who can do that, because it looks easy, but it is not. Yeah.
Yes, I realized, and I was just looking at pages of the score a while ago, and I said no other group. I think no other group could do this in the present, except Kiai Fatahila, for that matter.
But they promise now. They promise now, because the premiere will be in 2022. They promise to play it by heart until then.
Oh, okay.
That's their promise. That's their promise.
That's different. Wow, that I have to see. That's fantastic. I mean, in the way they play traditional music, in that sense, by heart. I mean, because I understand this is a rehearsal, and I could see the rehearsal aspects of it. I mean,
yeah,
the spontaneity
it was just after 2 weeks working together every day.
Wow. Okay.
So I think it was a fabulous result for that short time for these guys. Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned that in the case that Kiai Fatahila is not involved, then you will actually not accept the commission. I was wondering. So in the hypothetical sense, though, that you actually need to compose for another gamelan, would you actually do something different?
I would first study what these players are playing, what they know, what kind of abilities they have, and then I would decide whether I do it or not. So it really, I always, when I get commissions, I try to figure out first for whom am I writing. And most of my pieces primarily are written for very special players. Like this percussion solo Snell speech, I had Max and his way to play always in mind. That doesn't mean it cannot be played by someone else. That's fine. Yeah? But for my compositional process, it's very important to know the person, to know the character of the person and or the group. Yeah. And then that helps me for designing a composition. And if it's done, then okay, someone else can also do it. In the case of the gamelan, I don't think that's another group could do it at the moment. At least I don't know a gamelan group who is so advanced in working with such complex notation. I don't know one.
If anyone doesn't have any questions, I actually have some more. Okay, you probably about the text. Maybe I'll just dive into the texts first because they were whispering something. So, yeah. And I haven't seen the score, admittedly. So, is this is there a source for this text?
No, it's completely phonetic.
Okay, all right.
The voices for me are like instruments, and they articulate like an instrument. There's no meaning, no text. It's just purely phonetic.
All right.
Yeah. Anybody else? Or are you continuing, Joachim? You can continue. I could come.
Okay. So you also mentioned a while ago that you kind of stopped composing for gamelan at a certain point.
Yeah.
And then this is just like a comeback of some sorts.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering about that situation. Why did you decide to stop?
The reason was that with both pieces that I did, I was not satisfied. While in the first case, it had to do with the players. In the second case, I felt I have, in a way, misused some instruments. Misused in that sense that I used the instruments in a way they couldn't be played convincingly. And the second one is also on my YouTube channel, also played by Quejada. It's called Cross Currents. You can listen to it. And then I felt it was always such a drag for me to deal with the scales, because that was written for gamelan de gung, which is purely pentatonic, and I didn't want to write a pentatonic piece. That was not my interest. So I had to find other ways, but that was kind of limitation, which seen from one side was quite challenging for me. But then after a while, it also became too limited for me. And then I said, no, I can't do that anymore.
So I was wondering then about the difference now. So there's Dieter, the gamelan performer, and also Dieter, the composer. Like how much conflation is happening between the two, or are they also like separate things to deal
completely
with?
separate, completely separate. That has nothing to do with each other. Because I'm playing Balinese gamelan, Balinese gamelan playing is something completely different, like that what I have composed. What I have composed is almost exclusively to do with sonorities, with sound levels. Balinese gamelan, not at all. That has to do only with rhythm and virtuosity. That's completely different. No connection.
My question has to do with the reverse of that. Have you had any conscious efforts into bringing the gamelan into an ensemble of European instruments, clarinets and violins and cellos and pianos?
No.
So it doesn't interest you to bring the color of the gamelan into that?
It's for me, you know, percussion is my main world, percussion instruments. And so the gamelan instruments, they have a special kind of aura, which I feel is completely different to, let's say, the cello or a double bass or something else. So I have no interest in combining that. I won't say, don't want to say that it's impossible. Maybe other composers can do that, or some have done it, like Lou Harrison, for example.
Yeah,
but,
no, my question, Pat Dieter, was that to bring the idea of the sound world of the gamelan into the Western, I don't like that word, but the European instrumental practice. Bring, do you have any conscious efforts into doing that? I mean, I could say that with gamelan Musik 2, but that was just my opinion. That's my reception of that. But of your consciousness, of course.
I have never done that consciously. I've never done that consciously.
But you know, in my opinion, it comes into that. I mean, Angin. Yeah, I'm very familiar with your early work because that was had most impact to me because that was when we met. Angin and gamelan Musik 2 has so much of that there that it's unmistakably, if you're familiar with the Southeast Asian musical culture, you'd feel that there. And to make that, to have that unconsciously even makes it even more powerful to me because it comes into the practice without your consciousness. I mean, that's very important.
Because I think I must admit that if you live in Indonesia for such a long time as I have done, if you play gamelan since 40 years, it's part of my life. Yeah, it's a part of my life, and because it's a part of my life, it has a certain influence. But it has never interested me to imitate the gamelan. For me, this is my another world, my third world in a way. Yeah.
That's different. Yeah.
what happens in the unconscious? Yeah, silakan. Silakan may happen. I don't
May
care.
happen, yeah, precisely. And I think that's what we as practitioners here, I mean, other practitioners, the Philippines, should also be aware of, be conscious of the unconscious. I mean, we be conscious that there is an unconscious aspect. That's something that has to be natural. This very difficult aspect, naturalness. I just completed a book which I'm having reviewed for a publication. There's one aspect there which I call naturalness, and it's very hard to explain, but it has to do with the aesthetic and the unconscious, actually. And when I make some revisions, I will re-mention the Kamera Musik there in that piece, in that book. Yeah.
And you should also not forget the way I think in the moment when I'm composing is something completely else than the mental process of someone else who listens to the music or analyzes the music. That's his or her own interpretation, which might be completely different than my personal intention. And that's fine for me. I even like that. If someone has an impression of my music, which is completely different from my own one, it's good. It's fine for me.
That means that what really transcends is the aesthetic. It's a beautiful piece of music, so it comes into your mind in whatever way you relate it with your experience. I think that thing, despite your protean self having jazz and having big band and having that thing, is what transcends it. What becomes Dieter Mack actually is this transcendence of these different protean selves into one formula of a German-born guy who lives more years in Indonesia.
Yeah, and it's what I have said in one of my comments from one of the last sessions. For me, it's important that a listener makes his or her own narrative of a piece of music, and that must not be mine. Yeah, that's why I don't want to tell people before what they have to hear, like they do in fine arts. You go to an exhibition and they explain you what you have to see. Sorry, that's boring for me. I don't like that.
You empower the listener in that sense, and yes, so that you could put a CD side by side. The first track would be your big band piece, and the second track would be this piece for gamelan, and you can transcend. You can hear, it's still Dieter Mack, in that sense.
In a way, it is. Yeah.
It is exactly Dieter, because you wrote both of the pieces. I mean, it's in the same way. If I would look at Juro Kim's pop music this morning and put his trio for strings, which we discussed a few weeks ago, or AJ's songs for the church and his piece for gamelan and chamber ensemble. I mean, there is these things that actually powerfully identify with the composer, and this cannot be actually erased by whatever kind of music you're doing. It's already embedded in that.
If I do a little advertising for myself now, I'm really looking forward to the 14th of July. On the 14th of July, there will be the issue of 3 triple CD of music of mine, including from 1984 until last year.
Which label is this?
From the Hochschule. From the
Hochschule. Wow.
They do that. Wow. They do that for me, for my departure, and I'm really looking forward how that.
Are you retiring this year, Dieter?
No, next year, because my successor cannot come, and I have to teach 2 semesters more.
Okay.
But that will be interesting then. What are the red line through all these 40 years, and what has changed and what has not changed? I'm looking forward to that.
It's nice to look at yourself from that sense. It's like you're an outsider. It was you, but you're an outsider looking to yourself. I think that's one exercise. When I was staying in Lübeck, I was exploring that in myself. I was walking in the in those little streets in the museum around in the Musik Hochschule over that area. And I was just thinking about, what if I wasn't me? What if I could become something else other than me? And I think the manifestation of that is your. I went to the museum near the Musik Hochschule, and you told me that there were so many Indonesian implements there. And what if our lives were like a museum? Our things we exhibit our different encounters as exhibitions. And I think if you were to become a museum, Pak Dieter, it's going to be more complex than the usual composer. I mean, I can understand Lakenman, he just composed that kind of music. Of course, he's going beyond, he's trying to show that he is Lakenman, so he can do anything. So his last piece, which was like a march, I think, actually still empowered him in that sense, but it still brought back the notion that, yeah, Lakenman is Lakenman, I mean, in that sense. But in your case, it's kind of different because you're like a museum in that sense. You have this big band that it's very seldom for a composer to be able to transcend his very construction of the self, to be able to practice all the interests he has, but with sincere maturity. You have matured in your big band music writing. If you compare that, if you were first doing it with doing jazz with Ranta in the 70s, for example, it has grown in its own. It has its own social life or cultural life.
Yeah.
I guess it's like we should start thinking ourselves like a museum or something.
But I'm not a museum. Still no dust on my head.
No, not in the sense of age, but in the sense of the implements inside the knowledge you can get.
Don't worry.
You're a curator of yourself in that sense.
Yeah, I wanted to say I'd hate to be a museum. I would very much like to live a bit longer, please.
Yeah, I try.
No, not in that sense, but in the sense of exhibition.
I have a couple of questions. First, okay. Me composing for gamelan would be very strange. Certainly a lot stranger than Dieter Mack, because he understands gamelan a lot better than I do. And my understanding of it is very, very little and comes from Dieter. But it would be viewed by a lot of people as not so weird, maybe. Just because if you just look at the surface, it would be a Southeast Asian composing for Southeast Asian instruments, which would accord me, I think, unfairly a bit more license to do this. So the strange situation of a German composer composing for Indonesian instruments must raise a few eyebrows, and you must have encountered this throughout your career. How do you deal with that?
Actually, I never had, maybe some eyebrows has gone upward with some people, but I never had controversial discussion about it. So, yeah, no, sorry, I didn't have. That might be due to the fact that all these previous gamelan pieces, they have been performed in contexts where there were less people from the traditional contemporary music scene. It was more in the realm of the gamelan scene, and for them this was a quite normal thing. So it would have been different now with this piece, because it will be performed in a conventional contemporary music festival. So ask me again in 2 years when it's premiered in Essen, and then we can talk about that. So with the other two pieces, it never happened because the context was not the right one for that.
Second question. Sorry, just two more. Second question. It didn't sound very much to me like the gamelan, which struck me because your big band piece sounded very much like a big band piece. Is adopting the idiom not so important when writing for the gamelan? Is that somehow intrinsic in what the gamelan is?
No, it has to do with what I intended to do with the gamelan instruments. I was intentionally composing a piece that uses the characteristics of the gamelan instruments, but doesn't sound like a conventional gamelan piece.
And last question. You mentioned earlier that you decided not to compose anymore for gamelan instruments. Yeah. Why?
I explained that just some minutes before.
Oh, maybe that was when I was downstairs. Okay.
Yeah,
then
just because I felt too limited, and with various reasons. One was that I felt too limited.
Curiosity, actually, Dieter, about how you would navigate this idea of cultural appropriation, because it's such a high thing nowadays. You know, like people have been talking about it in North America, and given your background, if anyone does not know what your background is, then you would be pretty much like be in the firing range. So I wonder how your background and your engagement with gamelan actually will make sense in today's in the 21st century.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and as long as when you compose for a string quartet or a string trio, I would also not argue you are not allowed to do that because you are a Philippine person. So I'm a German, and if you are familiar with the instruments, if you are familiar with the tradition of this genre, it's okay. Yeah, I think even if you have different ethnic backgrounds, we start to know so much of each other, and the more you know of each other, the more you feel familiar with it. And I feel familiar with gamelan, and so I feel also able to do something with these instruments. I know what the aura of the instruments are, and I try to be honest and polite to the instruments, so to speak. And then the rest is just my music.
I think with the case of Dieter, just to comment on your question directly, with the case of Dieter, it's not really an appropriation in the sense of, if you read appropriation as a notion of power, it's not like that. In fact, that was a discussion. I remember, Dieter, you were telling me the first months we were in Bali, you were weeping, and you were telling me that you were weeping. I don't know if you remember the story, but you said you were weeping. You were disempowered. I mean, in a sense, because you were in a very strange place, and that really struck me, because that from that time I said, okay, this is not the usual, because I was working from a framework of this. You know, I was studying with Maceda at the time, and so the ethnomusicologists of the 1950s and the 1960s, where you come into the village and you record, and you are empowered by the notion of having this machine and record, and that's appropriation in my sense. And you bring it to the university, you analyze it without any regard for the notion of engagement. And when you told me that story, I think that was the first time I heard a Westerner weeping in Bali because of the culture. I don't remember I think it has to do with you being overwhelmed with everything, and that's it. And I was like, okay, this is a human encounter, and that's what and so in the case of Pak Dieter, I've always had I always held a special place in that, with regards to not even this notion of appropriation as power. Of course, everybody appropriates. If I write for a string quartet, I appropriate Beethoven or appropriate, but I'm not German, so there's people who say, oh, you have the right to do that. There was one time I was reading something, I think it was the 7th Symphony in the Musik Hochschule library, and some classmate of mine just comes in and said, why are you reading that? I mean, you should study something on your own. And I said, no, I'm just still on my own. Beethoven's a human being. I am a human being. I don't have to say I'm Filipino or Asian. It's a human being. And I think this kind of encounter, I think this notion of appropriation as a way by which separates people, I think should be reviewed, and should be would be changed to a concept of engagement, and And I'm not saying this because Dieter is here, but because that was the first time I encountered this notion of engagement with Dieter, living there and weeping in Bali because I don't know, he was running. I don't remember the story, but something like that. I don't think he remembers that too. So that would be different.
I was running through the village, screaming in one night when I had some nightmares, and then the Balinese had much fun with me at that time. But it helped me very much for socializing at that time.
Yeah, and engagement. Yeah.
I agree that in my first days in Bali, the socialization with the Balinese society was much more important than the music for me, actually. Mm. And the music was actually kind of side product. And the interesting thing was that after my first day in Bali, my social behavior changed completely when I came back to Germany. Oh. I was living the whole time, and still do. Marie-Luise know that village, Opfingen.
I know that village.
You know it, okay. And when I was a student, I was not interested in the village people because there was something better. I was an artist studying composition, ha ha ha. And then I came back from my first day in Bali, and the first thing what I did was I contacted the brass band, I contacted the church choir because I wanted to have contact with the people. Because I think that's important, that even if I do something completely different, these are my neighbors. These are the people I'm living with. And that I had learned in Bali. That collectivity and individuality can merge. They can happen at the same time.
Yes.
And that was the main influence from my life in Bali. Not the music.
I never asked you who asked you to go to Bali or who I mean, how did you get interested in that?
It was quite accidental, so just forget it. It would be too complicated.
Okay.
When we have another time together, then I'll tell you all.
Okay. Let's talk about it in Lübeck.
So, any other questions?
Yes.
Feliz.
Yes. So first I hope that it's okay with you, the parts that I selected to show the score, because
fine. Great.
It's sort of based on my bias. It's like, okay, I like this moment. But yeah, it was difficult because I also was so interested watching the musicians looking at each other to play together, and this synchronicity is really it's just amazing. So I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that the rehearsal took around 2 weeks before the recording, and how much were you involved in when, before or after, or every day, or?
I was there every day.
Okay.
But I only started to speak when they asked me. So I let them work, and Ivan was the leader, and they have to find their way to go through it. And only if they didn't understand something, then I joined in.
Okay. Yes, and you mentioned that they promised that they will play it by heart in the premiere, right? Because in the rehearsal, in the recording, I think they're almost already playing it by heart, because they're just always looking at the leader, and this rhythmic figures, it's really difficult. And I think there are moments where there's the decision from the leader to extend it a bit, like 1-2 beats. So, but then they're so together, so it still looks it's very natural, and
that's what I consider the interpretation, and I didn't interfere there, because Ivan knows me very well, and I know him very well, and if he feels to do it like that, then it's their interpretation. That's fine. And I think that's also interesting for a composer, to see how musicians deal with something. if they do it seriously, and they do it very seriously. I'm not a composer who, until 5 minutes before the premiere, is discussing the piano or the pianissimo with the clarinet player. I'm not a guy like that. There are composers like that, and I don't like it. In the dress rehearsal, I don't say anything anymore, whether I like it or not.
Yeah, it reminds me of Miles Davis talking to his ensemble. I was watching an interview of Chick Corea yesterday about his encounter with Miles Davis, and everything that Miles Davis said was, just play with us. That's all. When you rely on but there's also apropos to that, is that you rely on the musicians because you know it's good. When Iwan, we were talking about Iwan Gunawan, who I really admire so much as a musician. When Iwan performed my work Wala for Voices in Bandung in 2011, I was just in one rehearsal, and then he told me, I'll do this myself. He wasn't comfortable about me being there. So I think it was AJ and we were just watching from afar. I just wanted to see. And there's this thing about having people like Iwan do your stuff, that they have to make it their own, and it becomes their own in that sense. And I was so happy with that performance in Bandung of my piece. And I think it's going to be the same case with this piece of yours, Pak Dieter, with this notion of there are aspects that you have to leave to the musicians. Again, it brings me back to what you feel in jazz. I mean, in that sense. I mean, in jazz, you have a lead sheet, and the musicians work out from that lead sheet. And
that's right.
And it's the same level, I think, of musicianship and virtuosity in that sense.
But to be honest, I must also admit that it has already happened various times that I heard a dress rehearsal of a performance of mine, and I forbid that the people perform. That also happened because they weren't prepared. And I think you should also be able to do that. And I think one was in 1988, by the way, at the World Music Days in Hong Kong. I came to the dress rehearsal of my piece, and these guys where he was completely unprepared, like sight reading. I said, sorry, stop, that doesn't happen. And you won't play tomorrow that piece. And he didn't play. Good. So that's the difference. Yeah, you must separate the aspect of interpretation from the aspect of not being prepared.
That's a different aspect, because I'm talking from a position of encountering or engaging with virtuoso musicians who a priori to that is that they can do it well, and there's some latitude you leave to the musician for his because he's good.
Yeah.
I see a lot of thumbs ups and smiling.
That means we should finish.
That's how the Southeast very Filipino way of saying yes. Oh, it's good.
Thank you also very much for your attention, and I hope you.
Yes, Pak Dieter. Yes, and thank you for gracing us in our little engagements here. We are doing this because we want to enrich ourselves, and of course some Southeast Asian composer. There's a virtual MCL happening currently with Max as our guest performer, and Feliz and AJ are the teachers, are the trainers. We have young composers from 5 different countries, I think, Pauline, right? 5 different countries. Very young composers.
Max told me about it.
Yeah, and last week Max was here, so it's a very good opportunity. And next week we're having Johannes Schirlhorn, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then Manuel Nauri, I think, comes after. So I think this is very good to be able to encounter one as important as you are, Pak Dieter, for Southeast Asia, and in that sense. And I thank you very much for your time.
Good. Okay. Have a nice
thank you. Yes,
or nice afternoon, or whatever.
Yes. I'll let's keep in touch, Pak Dieter. You take care of yourself. please never go out to bars or to Hoa. No, you never go out anyway because, yeah, take care of yourself, please.